The stagecoach lurched to a violent stop outside St. Louis, Missouri, throwing Margaret Davies forward so hard that her teeth clacked together, and she tasted blood where she had bitten her tongue. Through the dust-caked window, she could see the crowded streets of the bustling city in the spring of 1874, filled with merchants, miners, and men who looked like they had not seen civilization in months. This was not what she expected, though honestly, Margaret had stopped expecting anything good years ago when her parents died and left her with nothing but debts, and a cousin who saw her as free labor. That was why she had answered the advertisement from Cooper Emerson, a rancher in Montana Territory who needed a wife and promised honest work, a roof, and respectability. She expected hardship because hardship was all she had ever known, but at least it would be her own hardship, chosen freely. The stagecoach driver opened the door, and Margaret stepped down onto the wooden sidewalk with her single carpet bag containing everything she owned. The advertisement had said Cooper would meet her at the Missouri Hotel at 2 in the afternoon, and according to the church bells ringing across the city, she was precisely on time. The hotel was not difficult to find, a 3-story building with painted signs advertising clean rooms and honest prices. Margaret smoothed her worn blue traveling dress, tucked a strand of dark brown hair back into her simple bun, and walked through the door with her spine straight despite the fear twisting in her stomach. The lobby was small but clean, with a clerk behind a wooden desk who barely glanced at her. Margaret stood near the door, clutching her bag, watching every man who entered. Some were rough-looking, some were well-dressed businessmen, and some were cowboys with dust on their clothes and weariness in their eyes. She had no idea what Cooper looked like beyond the description in his letters. Tall, brown hair, 26 years old and a rancher. That description could fit half the men in the territory. "Miss Davies." Margaret turned sharply to see a man standing just inside the doorway, hat in his hands. He was tall, as promised, with brown hair that curled slightly at the ends, and eyes the color of creek water on a sunny day, somewhere between blue and green. His face was tanned from outdoor work, with lines at the corners of his eyes from squinting into the sun, and he had a strong jaw covered in a few days of stubble. His clothes were clean but well worn, a simple cotton shirt, leather vest, and denim trousers tucked into scuffed boots. He looked nervous, which somehow made Margaret feel slightly better. "Yes," she said, finding her voice steadier than she expected. "Mr. Emerson, Cooper," he said quickly, and his smile was genuine, reaching those creek water eyes. "Just Cooper, please. I am glad you made it safely. The journey must have been hard." "I have endured worse," Margaret said honestly, then wondered if that sounded too harsh. The stagecoach was well enough. Cooper nodded and seemed to be studying her face, not in a way that made her uncomfortable, but as if he was trying to memorize her features. "I have a room for you here for the night," he said. "We will leave for Montana at first light. It is another week of travel, but I have supplies and a good wagon. I thought you might want a proper bed and a hot meal before we start." Margaret felt something unexpected, surprise. She had assumed they would marry immediately and leave, or perhaps not even wait for a room at all. "That is very kind," she said carefully. "I figured you would want some time," Cooper said, and his ears turned slightly red. "I mean, we are strangers. I know you agreed to marry me, but I thought we could talk some first. Get to know each other a little on the journey. Unless you want to marry today, we could find a preacher right now if you prefer." "I just thought, the journey sounds fine," Margaret interrupted, and she felt the corners of her mouth turn up slightly. He was nervous, genuinely nervous, and it made him seem more human, less like the unknown stranger she had agreed to bind her life to. "I appreciate the consideration." Cooper's shoulders relaxed visibly. Good. That is good. Let me get your room key and then we can have supper downstairs. The hotel has a dining room, nothing fancy, but the food is honest. Within 30 minutes, Margaret had been shown to a small but immaculate room on the second floor, with a real bed covered in a faded quilt, a washstand with a pitcher of clean water, and a window overlooking the street. It was more comfort than she had known in the 3 years since living with her cousin, where she had slept on a cot in the kitchen. She washed her face and hands, changed into her only other dress, a simple gray cotton that was slightly less worn than the blue, and went downstairs to meet Cooper in the dining room. He stood when she entered, another gesture of courtesy she had not expected. The dining room was half full of travelers and locals, the air thick with the smell of fried meat and fresh bread. Cooper had chosen a table near the window, away from the worst of the noise. "I took the liberty of ordering," Cooper said as Margaret sat down. "Steak and potatoes with greens if they have them. I hope that is acceptable." "That sounds wonderful," Margaret said honestly. Her stomach had been growling since noon, sustained only by the stale bread and cheese she had packed for the journey. For a moment, they sat in awkward silence. Cooper cleared his throat. "Your letters were very eloquent," he said. "You write well, thank you. My mother was a teacher before she married. She made sure I had an education." Margaret folded her hands in her lap. "Your letters were very honest. I appreciated that." "I tried to be truthful about what life would be like," Cooper said. "Montana is beautiful, but it is hard country. The winters are brutal, and the nearest town is a full day's ride from my ranch. I do not want you arriving expecting something I cannot provide." "I am not expecting luxury," Margaret said quietly. "I am expecting hard work, long days, and isolation. That is what I prepared myself for." Cooper frowned slightly. "Is that what you think marriage to me will be? Is it not?" Margaret met his eyes directly. "I am not a fool, Mr. Emerson. I know why men advertise for wives. You need someone to cook and clean and help with the work. I am prepared to do that." "Cooper," he corrected gently. "And yes, I need help with the ranch. I would be lying if I said otherwise, but I also want a partner, someone to talk to at the end of the day. Someone to build a life with." He leaned forward slightly. "I know this started as a practical arrangement, but I am hoping it can become more than that. In time." Margaret felt something in her chest loosen slightly, some tight knot of anxiety she had been carrying since she left Boston. "That would be nice," she admitted. The food arrived then, and it was as good as the smell had promised. Margaret had to force herself to eat slowly, to not betray how hungry she really was. Cooper ate with the efficient manner of someone used to taking meals quickly between work, but he kept glancing at her, as if checking to make sure she was real. "Tell me about Montana," Margaret said between bites. "Your letters mentioned mountains and rivers, but what is it really like?" Cooper's face brightened. "It is the most beautiful place I have ever seen," he said. "The sky seems bigger there, and the mountains go on forever. My ranch is in a valley near the Yellowstone River, with grassland that turns gold in the summer and wildflowers in every color you can imagine. I have about 300 head of cattle, some horses, chickens, and a vegetable garden that does well enough despite the short growing season." "It sounds isolated," Margaret said. "It is," Cooper agreed. "The nearest neighbor is 5 miles away, a family named Patterson. Good people. They have 3 children, and there is a small settlement about a day's ride south, more of a trading post than a town, but we can get supplies there. Once or twice a year I drive cattle to sell in Billings, but mostly we are on our own." "That does not bother you?" Margaret asked. "The solitude?" "I like the quiet," Cooper said. "I grew up in Ohio in a town that felt like it was getting smaller every year. Everyone knew everyone's business. When I was 18, I came west looking for space to breathe, and I found it in Montana. But I will admit, it gets lonely. That is part of why he stopped, looking embarrassed. Why you wrote for a wife, Margaret finished for him. Yes, Cooper met her eyes. I am not good at pretending. I will be honest with you, Margaret. I want a family. I want children someday if we are blessed with them. I want someone to share the work and the rewards. But I also promise you this. I will never raise my hand to you. I will never treat you as anything less than my equal, and I will do everything in my power to make your life easier than whatever you left behind. Margaret felt her throat tighten. That is a significant promise. I mean it, Cooper said simply. They finished their meal talking about smaller things. Margaret's journey from Boston, Cooper's experiences building his ranch over the past 5 years, the challenges of the coming journey to Montana territory. By the time they parted for the evening, with Cooper insisting on walking her to her room despite it being only 1 floor up, Margaret felt something she had not felt in years. Hope. The next morning dawned clear and cool, and Margaret was awake before sunrise out of long habit. She dressed in her traveling clothes, packed her few belongings, and met Cooper in the lobby as the first light was turning the sky pink and gold. He had a sturdy wagon waiting outside, pulled by 2 strong horses, with supplies packed carefully under a canvas cover. I hope you do not mind sharing the wagon seat, Cooper said. I thought it would give us a chance to talk during the journey. That seems practical, Margaret said, though privately she was relieved. The thought of sitting in the back of the wagon alone for a week had not appealed to her. Cooper helped her up onto the seat with a steady hand. And then they were off, heading north out of St. Louis as the city woke around them. The roads were busy at first, with other travelers and freight wagons heading in various directions. But as the day wore on and they left the city behind, the traffic thinned until they were alone on a dirt road that stretched toward the horizon. Cooper was an easy companion. He did not fill the silence with unnecessary chatter, but when he did speak, it was to point out something interesting. A hawk circling overhead, a creek where they could water the horses, the way the land changed gradually from settled farms to wilder grassland. Margaret found herself relaxing into the rhythm of the journey, the steady clip-clop of the horses' hooves and the creak of the wagon wheels becoming a kind of meditation. What made you answer my advertisement? Cooper asked on the second day, as they ate a simple lunch of bread and dried beef by the side of the road. Margaret considered lying or softening the truth, but something about Cooper's honest face made her want to match his candor. I had no other options, she said. My parents died when I was 16, and I went to live with my cousin in Boston. She was not unkind exactly, but she made it clear I was a burden. I worked for my keep, but there was no future there. No possibility of marriage, no money for my own household. When I saw your advertisement, I thought even if it was hard, at least it would be mine. Cooper nodded slowly. I am sorry about your parents. It was 7 years ago, Margaret said. I have made my peace with it. Still, Cooper said, loss does not stop hurting just because time passes. Margaret glanced at him. You sound like you know from experience. My mother died when I was 12, Cooper said. Fever. My father remarried within the year, and my stepmother made it clear she had no interest in raising another woman's son. That is part of why I left Ohio. I knew I would never inherit the farm, and staying felt like slowly suffocating. So we are both running from something, Margaret said, or running towards something, Cooper countered. I prefer to think of it that way. As the days passed and the landscape changed from settled farmland to rolling prairie, Margaret found herself genuinely enjoying Cooper's company. He was thoughtful and kind, quick to help her down from the wagon, and always making sure she was comfortable before seeing to the horses or setting up camp for the night. He did not expect her to cook over the campfire, instead insisting that they share the work, and he always made sure she had the warmest blankets at night. On the fourth evening, as they camped near a small stream with cottonwood trees rustling overhead, Cooper built a fire and then surprised Margaret by pulling a bundle wrapped in oilcloth from the wagon. "I brought something for you," he said, looking almost shy. "I hope it is not too forward." Margaret unwrapped the bundle to find a book, a real bound book with gilt edges and a leather cover. She opened it carefully and saw it was a collection of poetry by Elizabeth Barrett Browning. Her breath caught. "Your letters mentioned you like to read," Cooper said. "I know books are hard to come by out here, and I thought you might enjoy having something for the long winter evenings." Margaret ran her hand over the cover, feeling the quality of the leather, the weight of the pages. This book had not been cheap. "This is too much," she said. "It is a gift," Cooper said. "You do not have to do anything to earn it. I just wanted you to have it." Margaret looked up at him, this man she had known for less than a week, and felt something shift in her chest. "Thank you," she said softly. "This is the kindest thing anyone has done for me in a very long time." Cooper smiled, and in the firelight his eyes seemed to glow. "Then I am glad I could give it to you." That night, Margaret lay in her bedroll under the stars and thought about Cooper's words from their first evening. "I will do everything in my power to make your life easier than whatever you left behind." She had assumed it was empty courtesy, the kind of thing men said but did not mean. But every day he proved it was more than words. He helped with every task, he considered her comfort, he gave her space when she needed it and conversation when she wanted it. He was, she realized with some surprise, genuinely trying to make her happy. The realization was both wonderful and terrifying. They crossed into Montana territory on the seventh day, and the land opened up in a way that took Margaret's breath away. The sky was enormous, an endless dome of blue with clouds that cast racing shadows over the grassland. In the distance, mountains rose like jagged teeth against the horizon, their peaks still white with snow even though it was late May. "There," Cooper said, pointing. "Those are the Beartooth Mountains. My ranch is in the valley on this side, about another 2 days' travel." "It is beautiful," Margaret said, and meant it. The land had a wild, untamed quality that was both intimidating and exhilarating. "It gets cold," Cooper warned. "And sometimes the wind blows so hard you can barely stand upright. But when the wildflowers bloom in June, and the grass is green, and the cattle are fat and healthy, there is no place I would rather be." They reached the ranch on the afternoon of the 9th day. Margaret saw it first as a small collection of buildings in the distance, gradually resolving into a cabin, a barn, several outbuildings, and a corral with horses moving inside. As they drew closer, she saw that the cabin was larger than she expected, built from solid logs with a covered porch across the front and real glass windows. The barn was well maintained, and there was a vegetable garden already planted near the cabin, the neat rows showing recent care. Cooper drove the wagon right up to the cabin and then turned to Margaret with a smile that held both pride and nervousness. "Welcome home," he said. Margaret climbed down from the wagon, her legs stiff from the long day of travel, and looked around. The air smelled clean and fresh, with hints of pine and grass and something wild she could not name. The silence was profound, broken only by the wind and the soft sounds of the horses in the corral. "I know it is not much," Cooper started to say, but Margaret interrupted him. "It is wonderful," she said honestly. "I was expecting something much rougher." Cooper looked relieved. "I have been working on the cabin for 3 years. I wanted to make sure it was solid before I asked anyone to share it with me." He gestured toward the door. "Would you like to see inside?" The interior of the cabin was one large room, with a stone fireplace at one end and a kitchen area at the other. There was a real wood stove for cooking, shelves stocked with supplies, a solid table with 4 chairs, and several pieces of furniture that showed skilled craftsmanship. What surprised Margaret most was the bed, a large frame with a real mattress, positioned in one corner with curtains that could be drawn for privacy. "I sleep in the loft," Cooper said quickly, pointing to a ladder that led to a space under the peaked roof. "I thought you should have the main room." Unless, he stopped, his ears turning red again. "Thank you," Margaret said, understanding what he was trying to say. He was giving her privacy, not assuming that their marriage arrangement meant immediate intimacy. It was another unexpected kindness. Over the next few days, Margaret settled into the rhythm of the ranch. Cooper was right that there was work to be done, but he never expected her to do it alone. They worked together to care for the chickens, tend the garden, cook meals, and maintain the cabin. Cooper handled the heavier work with the cattle and horses, but he always asked if Margaret wanted to come along, teaching her about the animals and the land with patient good humor. Margaret found herself watching Cooper when he did not know she was looking. She noticed the way he moved with easy confidence around the horses, the way he spoke gently to the cattle, the way his face lit up when he saw an eagle soaring overhead. She noticed his hands, rough from work but careful when he handed her a cup of coffee in the morning. She noticed the way he always made sure there was hot water for washing at the end of the day, and the way he never went to bed without asking if she needed anything. A week after they arrived at the ranch, on a warm evening with the windows open to catch the breeze, Cooper cleared his throat over supper. "I have been thinking," he said. "We have been here a week, and you have not said anything about getting married, by a preacher, properly." Margaret set down her fork. "I assumed we would when the opportunity arose." "There is a circuit preacher who comes through the settlement once a month," Cooper said. "He will be there next week. I thought we could ride down, get properly married, and maybe get any supplies you need." "Things for yourself, fabric for dresses or whatever you want." "That sounds reasonable," Margaret said. Cooper hesitated. "Margaret, I want you to know that you do not have to do this if you have changed your mind. I would not hold you to the agreement if you have decided this life is not what you want. I could arrange for you to get back to St. Louis or anywhere else you want to go." Margaret stared at him. "Do you want me to leave?" "No," Cooper said immediately. "No, I just want you to have a choice. Real choice, not just the lack of options that brought you here in the first place." Margaret felt warmth spread through her chest. "I have not changed my mind," she said quietly. "In fact, I find myself quite content here, more content than I expected to be." Cooper's smile was like sunrise. "I am glad," he said, "because I find myself quite content with you here too." They rode to the settlement the following week on 2 of Cooper's horses. Margaret had not ridden much before, but Cooper gave her his gentlest mare and rode beside her, ready to help if she needed it. The settlement was small, barely more than a trading post, a saloon, a blacksmith, and a few scattered buildings, but there was a real sense of community. People greeted Cooper warmly and looked at Margaret with open curiosity. The circuit preacher was a middle-aged man named Reverend Thomas, with kind eyes and a booming voice. He agreed to perform the marriage ceremony that very afternoon, in the small space behind the trading post that served as a makeshift church when he visited. There were no flowers, no fancy dress, no crowd of well-wishers. Just Margaret in her gray cotton dress, Cooper in his cleanest shirt, Reverend Thomas with his worn Bible, and the trading post owner and his wife as witnesses. But when Cooper took Margaret's hands and spoke his vows, looking into her eyes with absolute sincerity, It felt more real and meaningful than any grand ceremony could have been. I, Cooper Emerson, take you, Margaret Davies, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to honor you, to cherish you, to work beside you, and to do everything in my power to make you happy for all the days of our lives. Margaret's voice was steady as she repeated her own vows, and when Reverend Thomas pronounced them husband and wife, Cooper's kiss was gentle and brief, a promise rather than a claim. They spent the rest of the afternoon at the trading post, where Cooper insisted Margaret choose whatever she wanted. She selected fabric for 2 new dresses, a good pair of boots, some ribbon that caught her eye, and a few books that the trader had in stock. Cooper added practical supplies, bags of flour and sugar, coffee, ammunition, and other necessities. He also bought Margaret a wide-brimmed hat to protect her from the sun, and a beautiful shawl woven in patterns of blue and green. "You do not have to buy me all this," Margaret protested as Cooper loaded everything into the saddlebags. "You are my wife," Cooper said simply. "I want to give you things." They rode back to the ranch as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Margaret felt the weight of the ring on her finger, a simple gold band that Cooper had produced from his pocket before the ceremony, and felt something she had not felt in years. Joy. Pure, uncomplicated joy. That night back at the cabin, there was a moment of awkwardness as they prepared for bed. Cooper stood near the ladder to the loft, and Margaret stood near the curtained bed, and they looked at each other in the lamplight. "I am still happy to sleep in the loft," Cooper said. "There is no rush for anything. I want you to be comfortable." Margaret took a breath, feeling her heart hammering. "Cooper, we are married now, properly married. I do not expect you to sleep in the loft forever." Cooper's eyes widened. "Are you sure? I do not want you to feel obligated." Margaret crossed the room to stand in front of him. "I am sure," she said. "I have been watching you these past 2 weeks, and I have seen how kind you are, how patient, how genuine. I trust you, Cooper. And more than that, I find myself wanting to be truly your wife." Cooper's hand came up to cup her cheek, his touch gentle. "I have been falling in love with you since the moment you stepped down from that stagecoach," he admitted. "I did not think it was possible to feel this way so quickly, but every day I am more certain. You are everything I hoped for and so much more." "Then show me," Margaret whispered, and when Cooper kissed her this time, it was not brief or restrained. It was deep and passionate, full of weeks of held-back feeling, and Margaret felt herself melt into it. That night, in the privacy of their cabin with the curtains drawn around the bed, Cooper and Margaret became husband and wife in every sense. Cooper was gentle and patient, always checking to make sure Margaret was comfortable, and Margaret felt cherished in a way she had never experienced before. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the bed that was now theirs, and Margaret felt tears slip down her cheeks. "Did I hurt you?" Cooper asked immediately, concern filling his voice. "No," Margaret said, laughing a little through her tears. "I am just happy." "I did not think I could be this happy." Cooper pulled her closer, kissing her forehead. "I promise I will do everything I can to keep making you happy," he said. "Every day for the rest of our lives." Summer settled over Montana with long golden days and nights that stayed light until nearly 10 o'clock. Margaret threw herself into learning everything about ranch life, and Cooper was an eager teacher. She learned to milk the cow Cooper brought from a neighboring ranch, to churn butter, to tend the chickens and collect eggs. She learned to identify which plants in the grassland were edible and which were poisonous, to predict weather by watching the clouds and the behavior of the animals. Cooper taught her to ride properly, and they would spend evenings riding out to check on the cattle, Cooper pointing out landmarks and telling her stories about the land. Margaret learned to shoot, Not well, but competently enough to defend herself if needed. Cooper insisted she always carry a rifle when she went out alone, though he admitted the biggest danger was probably getting lost or injured, not outlaws or hostile animals. The neighboring family, the Pattersons, came to visit in July, bringing their children and a warm welcome for the new Mrs. Emerson. Sarah Patterson was a round-faced woman with a ready laugh, and her husband Ben was a quiet man who clearly adored his wife. Their children, 2 boys and a girl ranging from 5 to 12, were energetic and curious. "I am so glad Cooper finally brought a wife home," Sarah said as she and Margaret prepared coffee in the cabin while the men talked outside. "He has been alone out here too long. A man needs family." "He seems content enough," Margaret said. "Oh, he manages," Sarah agreed. "But managing is not the same as thriving. You can see the difference in him already. He smiles more, laughs more. That is your doing." Margaret felt a warm glow at the words. "He has made me happy too," she admitted. "Happier than I thought possible." As summer turned toward fall, Margaret realized she had not had her monthly courses since arriving in Montana. At first, she thought it was the change in environment or the hard work, but when September came and still nothing, she began to suspect. She said nothing to Cooper, wanting to be certain, but she noticed him watching her with a curious expression when she could not finish her breakfast one morning and had to step outside for fresh air. "Are you feeling all right?" he asked when she came back in, his face creased with concern. "I think so," Margaret said. Then, because she could not keep it from him, "Cooper, I think I might be with child." Cooper's face went through a series of expressions: surprise, joy, worry, and then pure elation. "Truly?" he asked, his voice almost a whisper. "I think so," Margaret repeated. "It is too early to be certain, but the signs are there." Cooper crossed the room in 2 strides and pulled her into his arms, holding her as if she were made of glass. "A baby," he said. "We are going to have a baby." "If I am right," Margaret cautioned, but she was smiling. "You are right," Cooper said with utter certainty. "I can feel it. We are going to be parents." Over the next weeks, Cooper became even more attentive than before, constantly checking on Margaret, insisting she rest more, taking on tasks she had been doing without complaint. Margaret protested at first, but eventually gave in, recognizing that it made Cooper feel better to care for her this way. By October, there was no doubt. Margaret's belly was beginning to show a small curve, and she felt the strange flutter of movement inside her that the books Cooper fetched from the settlement told her was the baby. The reality of it filled her with a mixture of excitement and terror. She would be responsible for another life, a tiny human who would depend on her completely. "What if I am not a good mother?" she asked Cooper one evening as they sat by the fire, her hand on her growing belly. "You will be wonderful," Cooper said with absolute confidence. "You are kind and patient and strong. Our child will be lucky to have you as a mother." "And you as a father," Margaret said, leaning against him. "You will teach them about the land, about the animals, about how to be good and honest." "We will teach them together," Cooper corrected. Winter came early and hard that year, with snow falling in mid-November and not stopping for 3 days. Margaret watched from the cabin windows as the world turned white, the mountains disappearing behind curtains of snow. Cooper had prepared well, stockpiling firewood and supplies, moving the cattle to the sheltered valley where they would be protected from the worst of the wind. But even so, the isolation was profound. "This is what winter is like here," Cooper said as they huddled near the fire, the wind howling outside. "Sometimes we will not see another person for months. Are you all right with that?" Margaret looked around the warm cabin, at the shelves stocked with food, at the books waiting to be read, and most of all at Cooper sitting beside her, his hand resting protectively on her belly. "I am all right with it," she said. "As long as I have you, I am all right with anything." The winter months were long but not lonely. Cooper and Margaret spent the dark evenings reading aloud to each other, playing card games, talking about everything and nothing. Cooper carved toys for the baby, little wooden animals and a rattle that he sanded until it was perfectly smooth. Margaret sewed tiny gowns and blankets from the soft fabric Cooper had bought from a trader who made a risky winter journey through. On the nights when the cold was too fierce, even with the fire burning high, they would retreat to bed early, holding each other for warmth and comfort. Margaret felt the baby moving more strongly now, and Cooper would place his hand on her belly with wonder in his eyes, feeling the kicks and turns. "Hello in there," he would whisper. "This is your father. I cannot wait to meet you." Spring came late, not truly arriving until mid-April, when the snow finally melted enough to reveal brown grass that would soon turn green. Margaret was heavily pregnant by then, moving slowly and feeling the weight of the child inside her. Cooper watched her with anxious eyes, clearly worried about the birth. "Sarah Patterson said she would come when the time was near," he assured Margaret. "She has helped with many births. You will not be alone." "I know," Margaret said, though privately she was terrified. She had heard enough stories about childbirth to know it was dangerous, that women died from it regularly, and that even successful births were agonizing ordeals. The baby came on a warm day in late May, almost exactly a year after Margaret had first arrived in Montana. The pain started in the morning, and Cooper immediately rode for the Pattersons, returning within hours with Sarah, who took over with calm competence. "Everything looks good," Sarah assured Margaret as she checked her over. "First babies take their time, so settle in. It will be a long day, but you are strong. You will do fine." Sarah was right about the length. The labor went on for hours, with Margaret walking when she could, resting when she could not, and gripping Cooper's hand through the worst of the pains. Cooper stayed by her side the entire time, murmuring encouragement, bringing her water, never leaving even when Sarah gently suggested he might want to wait outside. "I am staying," he said firmly. "We are in this together." As the sun was setting, painting the cabin in golden light, the baby finally came. Margaret heard the cry, thin and indignant, and then Sarah was laughing and saying, "It is a boy, a healthy, strong boy." Cooper's face was wet with tears as Sarah placed the baby, cleaned and wrapped in a soft blanket, in Margaret's arms. He was tiny and perfect, with a wisp of dark hair and eyes that tried to focus on Margaret's face. "Hello," Margaret whispered, feeling love crash over her like a wave. "Hello, little one, I am your mother." "And I am your father," Cooper said, his voice thick with emotion. He touched the baby's tiny hand, and the little fingers curled around his thumb. "Welcome to the world, son." They named him Thomas, after the preacher who had married them, with Cooper's surname of Emerson. Little Thomas was a good baby, healthy and strong, and Margaret marveled at how he changed their lives. The cabin that had felt cozy with 2 people now felt full and complete with 3. Cooper was a devoted father, walking Thomas around the cabin when he fussed, singing him silly songs, showing him the horses and cattle even though he was far too young to understand. "Look at the world you are going to grow up in," Cooper would say, holding Thomas outside to see the mountains. "It is big and wild and beautiful, and it is all yours to explore." Margaret recovered from the birth more quickly than she had feared, helped by Cooper's insistence on doing most of the work while she focused on healing and caring for Thomas. By the time summer was in full swing, she felt almost back to normal, though her body had changed in ways that surprised her. "You are beautiful," Cooper insisted when she expressed frustration at how her dresses fit differently. "You gave me a son. You are the most beautiful thing I have ever seen." Life settled into a new rhythm. Days were full of work and caring for Thomas, but there was joy in it. Margaret found she loved being a mother, loved watching Thomas grow and change every day. Cooper thrived as a father, his patience and gentleness with their son making Margaret fall even more deeply in love with him. On their first wedding anniversary, Cooper surprised Margaret by suggesting Ben Patterson stay with Thomas for a few hours so he could take Margaret on a ride, just the two of them. Sarah had agreed to the plan in advance, arriving with fresh bread and enthusiasm. "Go," Sarah said, shooing them toward the horses. "You two deserve some time alone. Thomas will be fine with me." Cooper led Margaret to a place she had never been before, a meadow high in the foothills where wildflowers bloomed in every color imaginable. There was a small creek running through it, and the view of the valley below was breathtaking. "I found this place my first summer here," Cooper said as they sat together on a flat rock, the horses grazing nearby. "I thought someday I would bring someone special here to share it with. I just did not know it would be you." "I am glad it is me," Margaret said, leaning against him. "Margaret," Cooper said, turning to face her. "A year ago you stepped off that stagecoach expecting hardship and difficulty. I hope I have kept my promise to make your life easier than you imagined." "You have done more than that," Margaret said softly. "You have made my life better than I ever dreamed possible. You have given me a home, a family, and more love than I knew existed. I came here thinking I was entering a practical arrangement, but I found something real instead. I love you, Cooper, more than I can ever express." "I love you too," Cooper said, kissing her. "More than anything in this world except possibly our son, and even that is a close call." Margaret laughed, and they sat in the meadow until the sun began to set, talking about everything and nothing, planning for the future, dreaming of more children and the life they would build together. The years that followed were full but happy. Thomas grew into a sturdy toddler with his father's brown hair and his mother's dark eyes, curious about everything and fearless in a way that terrified and delighted Margaret in equal measure. When he was 2, Margaret found herself pregnant again, and this time the labor was shorter, resulting in a daughter they named Caroline, with blonde hair that must have come from some distant relative and eyes the same creek watercolor as Cooper's. "Now we have one of each," Cooper said, holding Caroline while Thomas slept curled against Margaret. "Our family is complete." "Is it?" Margaret asked, smiling. "You do not want more." "I want whatever makes you happy," Cooper said. "If you want a dozen children, we will have them. If you want to stop at 2, that is fine too." They ended up with 4, Thomas, Caroline, and then 2 more boys over the next years, James and David. The cabin that had seemed spacious with 2 people became cramped with 6, but it was a warm, loving kind of cramped. Cooper added on a room for the older children, and then another, until the cabin was twice its original size. The ranch prospered under their joint efforts. Cooper's herd grew, his reputation for quality cattle spreading throughout the territory. Margaret's garden became legendary among their neighbors, producing vegetables even in the short Montana growing season. They acquired more chickens, some pigs, and eventually a dairy cow, so there was always fresh milk for the children. Thomas showed an early aptitude for working with animals, often following Cooper around and mimicking everything his father did. Caroline was quieter, preferring to help Margaret with the garden and the house, but she had a sharp mind and learned to read almost effortlessly. James was the adventurous one, always wandering off and having to be retrieved from various misadventures. David, the youngest, was still a baby, but he had a sunny disposition that made everyone smile. Life was not without its challenges. There were hard winters when supplies ran low, and everyone was sick of being trapped inside. There were summers when the heat was oppressive, and the work seemed endless. There was the time a bear got into the chicken coop and killed half the flock before Cooper could drive it off. There was Caroline's illness when she was 4, a fever that lasted for days and had Margaret and Cooper taking turns sitting up with her at night, praying she would recover. She did, but the fear of losing her never quite left. Through it all, Cooper and Margaret faced everything together. They were partners in the truest sense, sharing the work, the worry, and the joy. On difficult days, they would remind each other of where they had started, two strangers taking a chance on each other, and marvel at how far they had come. "You ever regret answering my advertisement?" Cooper asked one evening when the children were finally asleep and they had a rare moment of quiet together. "Never," Margaret said without hesitation. "Not once." "Do you regret placing it?" "Never," Cooper echoed. "You were the best decision I ever made." As the children grew older, Margaret and Cooper began to talk about the future. Thomas would eventually take over the ranch if he wanted it. Caroline showed signs of wanting more than ranch life could offer, talking about becoming a teacher like her grandmother had been. James wanted to be a scout, exploring the wild places. David was still too young to know what he wanted. "Whatever they choose, we will support them," Cooper said. "I do not want them to feel trapped the way I did growing up. If they want to stay, wonderful. If they want to leave and find their own paths, that is wonderful too." "You are a good father," Margaret said. "I learned from the best mother," Cooper replied. When Thomas was 10, Caroline 8, James 6, and David 4, Montana achieved statehood, becoming the 41st state in the Union. There was a celebration at the settlement, with speeches and food and dancing. The Emerson family attended, and Margaret watched Cooper dancing with Caroline while Thomas tried to teach James the steps. "We built something here," Sarah Patterson said, standing beside Margaret. "Not just ranches and homes, but real communities, real families, you and Cooper especially. I remember when he was alone out here, and now look at him. 4 children, a thriving ranch, and a wife who loves him. That is success." "I am the lucky one," Margaret said. "He gave me everything I never knew I needed." As the years continued to pass, Margaret and Cooper aged together gracefully. Cooper's brown hair gained streaks of gray at the temples, and the lines around his eyes deepened, but to Margaret he was as handsome as the day they met. Margaret herself gained a few silver strands in her dark hair, and her body bore the marks of bearing 4 children. But Cooper still looked at her as if she were the most beautiful woman in the world. Thomas grew into a young man who was the image of his father, tall and steady and kind. At 19, he married a girl from the settlement, a sweet young woman named Lucy, and they built a small cabin on the far end of the ranch property. Cooper legally deeded half the ranch to Thomas, making him a full partner in the operation. Caroline, at 17, announced she was going to Helena to attend the new normal school and become a teacher. Margaret felt her heart break a little at the thought of her daughter leaving, but Cooper was true to his word, supporting Caroline's dream completely. He even traveled with her to Helena to make sure she was safely settled before returning home with stories of how grown-up and confident their daughter had become. James, at 15, was already talking about joining the army when he was old enough, wanting to see the world beyond Montana. David, now 13, was the only one who seemed certain he wanted to stay on the ranch forever, working with the horses that were his passion. "Our babies are growing up," Margaret said one evening as she and Cooper sat on the porch, watching the sun set over the mountains. "They are good people," Cooper said. "We raised them right." "We did well," Margaret agreed. In the summer of 1895, more than 20 years after Margaret had first arrived in Montana, The family gathered for a special celebration. Thomas and Lucy had just had their first child, a daughter, making Cooper and Margaret grandparents for the first time. Caroline came home from Helena for the occasion, bringing her beau, a young teacher she was courting. James had recently enlisted and was home on leave before his first posting. David was there, of course, having never left. The cabin and its additions were full to bursting with people, with laughter, with love. Margaret cooked an enormous meal with Caroline and Lucy's help, while Cooper and Thomas managed the chaos of too many people in too small a space. The new baby was passed from person to person, exclaimed over and adored by everyone. That evening, after the younger people had gone outside to enjoy the warm night air, Margaret and Cooper found themselves alone in the kitchen, washing dishes together as they had done thousands of times before. "Remember when it was just us?" Margaret asked. "Just you and me in this cabin, learning to be husband and wife." "I remember," Cooper said, drying a plate. "I remember being terrified you would decide I was not what you wanted and leave. I remember expecting hardship and finding happiness instead," Margaret said. "You kept your promise, Cooper. You made my life easier than I imagined, so much easier, so much better." Cooper set down the dish towel and pulled Margaret into his arms, heedless of her wet hands. "You made my life complete," he said. "Before you, I had land and cattle and a good business, but I was alone. You gave me a family. You gave me love. You gave me everything that matters." They stood there in the warm kitchen, holding each other as the sounds of their family drifted in from outside, and Margaret felt a contentment so deep it was almost overwhelming. She had come to Montana territory expecting to endure a difficult life, to work hard for survival, to make the best of a practical arrangement. Instead, she had found a love so deep and true it had sustained her through more than 2 decades, had created new lives, had built something lasting and meaningful. "I love you," she whispered to Cooper. "I love you too," he whispered back. "More than ever, always." They stood there until Caroline came looking for them, laughing when she found them embracing in the kitchen like young lovers instead of the grandparents they now were. The years continued to be kind to the Emerson family. Cooper and Margaret grew old together, their lives intertwined so completely that neither could imagine existence without the other. They watched their children build their own lives, Thomas expanding the ranch and having 3 more children, Caroline marrying her teacher and opening a school in Helena, James serving honorably in the Army before returning to Montana and starting a freight business, David taking over the horse breeding side of the ranch and becoming known throughout the state for the quality of his stock. Through it all, Cooper and Margaret remained each other's constant. They still took rides together when the weather permitted, still read to each other in the evenings, still held hands when they walked. The passion of youth had mellowed into something deeper and more sustaining, a love that had weathered storms and celebrated joys and emerged stronger for all of it. On their 30th wedding anniversary, their children and grandchildren, now numbering more than a dozen, threw them a party at the ranch. Nearly 100 people attended, neighbors and friends from throughout the region, all coming to celebrate the couple who had become something of a local legend. Cooper and Margaret, the mail-order bride and the cowboy who had built an empire of love. Speech. Someone called and the crowd took up the chant. Cooper stood, pulling Margaret up with him. "I am not much for speeches," he said, his voice carrying across the crowd. "But I will say this. 30 years ago, I placed an advertisement for a wife because I was lonely and needed help running a ranch. What I got was so much more than I asked for. I got a partner, a best friend, the love of my life, and the mother of my children. Margaret came west expecting hardship, and I promised to make her life easier. But the truth is, She made my life everything I did not even know I wanted. So here is to my wife, to the best 30 years a man could ask for, and to 30 more if God grants us the time." The crowd erupted in cheers and applause. Margaret felt tears streaming down her face as Cooper kissed her, not caring that everyone was watching. "Your turn," Cooper said, grinning at her. Margaret wiped her eyes and looked out at the sea of faces, at the family and community they had built together. "I came to Montana Territory with one small bag and no hope," she said. "I found a man who gave me everything. Not just material things, though this beautiful ranch and our home are blessings. But he gave me respect, partnership, and love that never wavered. He gave me the freedom to become more than I ever thought I could be." Every day for 30 years, Cooper has kept his promise to make my life easier and better than I imagined. But more than that, he made my life full of joy. So thank you, Cooper, for taking a chance on a mail-order bride from Boston. You got the best part of that bargain. "I disagree," Cooper said, pulling her close again. "I definitely got the best part." As the celebration continued around them, with music and dancing and children running through the summer twilight, Margaret leaned against Cooper and felt gratitude fill her entire being. She had come west expecting to survive, but she had learned to thrive. She had come alone, but she had found family. She had come seeking security, but she had found love. The story that had started with a mail-order bride stepping off a stagecoach, expecting hardship, had become a story of building a life filled with more joy and love than she had ever imagined possible. And it had all started with a cowboy who said he would make her life easier, and then spent 30 years proving he meant every word. As the sun set over the Montana mountains on that perfect summer evening, surrounded by the evidence of the beautiful life they had built together, Margaret and Cooper stood hand in hand, knowing that this was exactly where they were meant to be. Together, always together, in the home and the life they had created from hope, hard work, and a love that had turned out to be the greatest adventure of all.